I'm John Stanton, editor of Gambit, and this is the Get Down interview. And I am joined by Jeff Asher, who is a much smarter human being than I am, and is going to make me look stupid with all my dumb questions about data. He focuses a lot on crime data in his work. He's also a rabid Saints fan, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we want to thank the folks at our bar, my auxiliary office, for letting us sit and have a quick drink and chat. So, Jeff, welcome to the show.
Cheers.
Cheers. All right, let's get into this. So, I once had somebody say to me, very smart, when I first started as a reporter, and I got like some press release about some statistics, and it was his old editor, and he gruffly said, the problem with statistics is that people can make them say anything they want them to. So, as a guy who I feel like is very trustworthy with math, which I'm like ICP, you know, I like with magnets, I don't really know how math works so good. What is it, how do you approach crime data? First of all, just sort of like from I don't know, what is your approach to doing this work?
So first off, we should credit the master of that saying, which was Homer Simpson.
Homer Simpson.
Said people use statistics to prove their point. 41% of people all know that. I butchered, I think, his quote, but it's a Simpsons quote. I approach it as data is important, but it's as a storyteller. And so we can use data to do analysis. Not that data for data's sake is useful, but that we're seeing a trend, good or bad. We're trying to evaluate a program, good or bad. We're trying to see whether or not a certain professional sports franchise is doing better or worse. Data can help to tell that story. Mm-hmm. And so I think where data gets people lost is if it's not used in a way that helps to further a story, or the data itself is so complicated that people don't necessarily understand how to use it and how to understand it, and then you're just throwing numbers at a wall and mm-hmm. making yourself try and sound smart.
Well, now when it comes to like crime statistics in particular, that's a tough business to be in, right? Because like it's hard to get at a lot of them, right?
Well, it's hard to get at them. The way that stats are counted mm-hmm. can be very challenging. And the definitions can be very important. So the police department can be using a very specific definition of a phrase that sounds public, and police departments all over the country do this and have for a long time. But it sounds like one thing to the public, and it's not necessarily. And so the example I'll use, I think this was in 2022, back when I was working with the city council as their public safety consultant. And the police department was up giving a presentation. It was January, you remember, January 2022 was horrific here. And we were like 2 weeks in, and there's already been 10 murders. Mm-hmm. And the police department is talking about the cases, and they're talking about how they're solving them. And so they come up and they talk about, for these cases, we've got a 80% solve rate. And so that you think, oh, they've made an arrest in 80% of cases. Right. And the reality is, for them, a solve is any case where the denominator is the number of murders in a year. So we've had 10 murders in this year. The numerator is the number of cases where they've either had an arrest, cleared it by some sort of exception, like a murder-suicide, where you know who did it, but you can't make an actual physical arrest, or they had issued a warrant, regardless of when these offenses occurred. Oh. So in this case, it was January. They had made an arrest in 2 cases. They had made an arrest in 2 cases from the previous year, and they'd issued warrants for 4 other cases. So when you're talking about here is them using the same statistics, which would describe, based on how the FBI would define it, a 40% clearance rate, mm-hmm. an 80% solve rate, or if you wanted to use a different statistic, a 20% arrest rate, where they made an arrest in 2 out of 10 cases.
Right.
So you're using the exact same statistic and giving 3 very different pictures of your efficiency.
Yeah. That's you know, I think on the Wire they called it juke in the stats, right? And it was like a through line through a lot of that series, which was great because it kind of gave like a fun look inside of terrifying look inside of how police departments like deal with these things. Like they get under political pressure, so they figure out a way to make the statistics look how they want it to.
Certainly, and a lot of times departments are trying their hardest. They're not trying to physically or purposefully manipulate statistics, but because of the imperfections in the data, the imperfections in how the data is collected, we know that not every crime gets reported to police. We know that certain types of crime, like shoplifting or sexual assault, get systemically underreported to police. So these numbers are inherently wrong, and we're using wrong numbers that we're trying to then evaluate whether or not we're being efficient. And so it's a very difficult situation, even in the best of circumstances. And then oftentimes, or I wouldn't say oftentimes, occasionally you'll get times where there are efforts to manipulate. There is politicization, and we're seeing that in Washington, D.C. right now, where just the implication of manipulation of statistics has occurred, and it's been politicized. We have DOJ investigating, we have the House is investigating. And there's not even any evidence that it's happening systemically, yet it's this enormous deal because there's sort of this assumption that maybe it's true.
Yeah, and the irony of that is like what's happening right now with them, what they're doing with their occupation in DC, like is they have all these arrests, and like, oh, we did all these arrests, but because of the peculiarities of DC, all of the arrests they're doing have to go before grand juries in the city, and huge numbers. I think like a friend of mine who works in the police department there told me that it was over half of the arrests that the feds had made when he and I talked a month ago or so. Grand juries had no build, so that they didn't bring anything against the person because he was like, I think some of them were just bad cases, but a lot of them he thinks were them saying we just don't like what you're doing right now. But they go out and they're like, oh, we've made 1,000 arrests, and therefore the city is safer. But in actuality, neither of those things are really actually truly measurable, it feels like.
Yeah, and arrests is a terrible metric. Frequently you'll see, and we're seeing this now, arrests and guns seized are the two metrics that are used because they're hard numbers, they're easily calculated, they're finite, but I don't think that they're very efficient at determining success because one, just because you can go out and arrest people for anything. We've seen that. We've seen in New Orleans where you can have tens of thousands of arrests and you're not improving public safety. And I've never understood hey, we got 400 guns off the streets, in the last 2 months or something like that. Well, what percentage do we think you're getting? All that tells me is that there's an enormous number of guns on the streets and that that number's growing. Well, that's not good. That just means that, if you're getting 1% and it's consistent at 1%, then it's problematic.
I feel like back in in some period in human history, or American history, where there weren't just a ton of guns in the world, that might have been a useful metric, but now it's just, it's easy to get a gun everywhere. So like taking them on the streets, like, well, okay, fine. Teacup in the ocean, bro. Yeah,
and especially in places where it's genuinely legal to carry them. Yeah. The firearm itself may not be legal. It may be stolen or something like that. But it's a bad metric for evaluating effectiveness and efficiency, and it's unfortunately one that we see too often used. And I don't think it sends the message that sort of the powers that be think it does. Yeah.
Now, let's take a broad view on crime statistics, because when I first started at this job 5 years ago, I went over to the library and I pulled all of the books. They're like these big green tomes of the budget, and every year, the police department goes through and says these are the number of clearances we had on rape, on murder, on this or that or whatever in these statistics, and I looked at them, and what I noticed was that there seemed to be a fairly consistent wave pattern to crime. That you have these spikes and then they drop and then they come back up again, and they're not, it's not exact, it's not perfectly, but it seems like there's a bit of a natural rhythm to it. Am I way off base, or?
No, I don't think you're off base. I think that it goes up and it goes down, and especially if we're measuring it over short periods of time. If you're talking about a month or 2 months or even 3 to 6 months, it goes up and it goes down over that time frame, and so you need a level of patience and ability to see the kind of bigger picture that we tend not to want in the way that we consume information. I think that if you look at things like clearance rates, they go up and they go down, but they frequently go up and they go down just because the number of crimes goes up and down, and so you're changing the denominator. You've got the resources set aside to solve 100 murders, or you can solve 200 robberies in a year. That's just the number of detectives and the number of cases they can work and the odds of them solving a particular case. And so your clearance rates, rather than reflecting, more deterrence through increased cases is just a reflection of the number of cases that you're getting that come in.
That's an interesting point. I had not really thought about it like that before.
And so it makes it difficult because these are the statistics that we've said as a society that this is how we're going to measure your efficiency. And we're not inherently doing that a lot of times because of the way that basically the statistics that we've chosen and the statistics that are available to us to choose.
Okay, so 2022 was a bad year. That and I guess 2020 kind of seemed like two very high years. Where are we now in comparison to that?
So right now through September, we've had the fewest murders since 1970. And that's including the 14 people killed on Bourbon Street on January 1st. We're dramatically lower on pretty much every type of crime. Carjackings are down to 80% from where they were in 2022. Auto thefts peaked in 2023 and we're down 60-something%. Vehicle burglaries are down a tremendous amount. So pretty much everything that we measure, we're seeing large declines, 60% drop in shootings. What we're doing now, though, is we're kind of leveling off. And so we're seeing much more of a wavy pattern, which will take those gaudy year-to-date changes and say, hey, we're down 70%. We're at the lowest rate we've ever seen. And I think we're going to start to stop seeing those really big declines. Ideally, we don't see it bounce up and return to where we were even before COVID. We're below that for the most part. Ideally, we see it stay lower. It's certainly plausible that we see it kind of reach a new equilibrium. I don't know what's going to happen though from here.
Are there any of the major sort of statistical categories, like rape or violent, non-murderous kind of violent crime, those kind of things, that we haven't seen a reduction in, or that the reduction has not been really that much?
So rape and sexual assault is a tough one because it's something, and you can go back decades and see this as a measurement problem for the police department. And so I don't know that we necessarily have a good handle on that. And we know from the National Crime Victimization Survey that only a quarter of them are getting reported anyway.
That's crazy. I mean, it's understandable, but that's also crazy.
Is.
Yeah.
And so it's, I think, hard to say with a ton of confidence that we've necessarily seen a major change in that. In addition, if you go back a decade, the FBI in 2013 changed the definition of rape. And so you saw in New Orleans and elsewhere a big increase over the next few years as departments began to be more inclusive of what got counted as a rape.
Interesting.
And
how did that change?
Basically, I don't know the exact changes, but I know at one point you weren't allowed to have a male rape victim. And so they enabled male rape victims.
Right.
And then they added other means with which, like sensible means with which the definition would be more inclusive. A lot of cities have seen in the number of reported rapes dramatic increases. It's also something that police departments will frequently point to of, hey, we've done all this victim outreach. We have done this work to make sure that if women report it, that they're believed, that they're taken seriously, and that the cases are handled in an appropriate manner. And so, yeah, we're seeing more of these cases because we think that the share of these cases that are happening that are getting successfully reported is growing up. I don't know if there's a way to necessarily measure that, but that's oftentimes when you see it go up, departments will say, we think of this as it's not a positive, but from a data perspective, it's a positive.
That's, so and I think that is something that we've seen in a lot of different spaces, not just in crime, but like the best one right now and the most sort of on my mind one right now is autism, right? Like, people like RFK and other people are like, there is a crisis of autism because there's all these cases. Well, not really. Right? Like people didn't, first of all, it's a relatively new category. Neurodivergency is something that for a long time was treated as like, like what they call it, the refrigerator mom was what they called it in like the 40s and 50s because mothers were bad to their sons, so their sons became eccentric, right? And so like people looking back and they're saying, well, there weren't all these autistic people back then. Well, it's like, well, because people weren't being diagnosed. That's different than them not actually existing. It's just there weren't as many diagnoses. And it seems like that's a flaw when you start to look at historical data, right?
Yeah, I like the chart of like left-handedness over time in America, and as like society acknowledged and built tools that scissors for left-handed people, that the number of people acknowledging that my primary hand is my left hand went up.
I'm not in fact a demon,
right?
Yeah, which I still actually kind of believe, but But this gets me into the one of the things I want to talk about on data, which is it feels like people here in New Orleans, certainly, but I think other people outside of the city think it's like Mad Max outside. You know, like when you walk out of your house, you are pretty sure you're going to get like carjacked or shot at or stabbed or something, and it's not the case. And how much of that do you think is our in terms of the media's preoccupation with data?
Well, there's a saying, the media doesn't cover the planes that land. And
Right.
I love the saying, and it's not always true. Like sometimes you'll see, oh, this plane lost an engine, but it still landed. But for the most part, you know, when was the last time you saw an article about how there was no crime in a given week? I mean, it's very rare. And I think, so right now, we're in early October and have seen a sizable increase in murder in the last 2-3 weeks. It's been bad. We've seen a lot of really horrific crimes happen. We haven't necessarily seen a large increase in the number of shootings, though, which suggests that it's sort of a lot of randomness, perhaps. And I wouldn't jump to conclusions that it's this change in gun violence citywide. If you go back to the middle of September, we went a 14-day stretch where we had like 2 shootings. And that was the first time we'd had that happen in like 10 years. Mm-hmm. No articles about the latter. And because we've had a lot of murders recently, like rightfully so, we should be covering this as a story, but there weren't stories about the fact that we were sort of hitting over this stretch of historic low. And so when you think about, okay, is there more crime than there was last year? What is the crime rate? You think, well, I saw in the paper this, and I read an article about this, and my nephew, texted me this article, and there's never like, hey, Dad, there were no robberies yesterday. Like, the numbers tell me that vehicle burglaries were down 6%. Like, it's not a thing that happens. We only are aware of these things when they happen, and so it creates this feedback loop where you're always assuming that things are worse than they are, or they're getting worse in your perceptions. And we see this in national polling. Mm-hmm. Very rarely do we see this where people actually perceive things. And this is actually my podcast that I just launched, is all about the difference in the perception between what's actually happening and what the data shows, and kind of like, how do we address this as a story, especially at a time now when we're seeing the lowest murder rate ever recorded in the country, the lowest murder rate in New Orleans, or the most number of murders in 55 years in New Orleans. How do we address this lack of ability to perceive?
Yeah, because I feel like it's such a huge problem and an important thing, because I look at what's going on right now in the country, and like they're talking about sending in the military into New Orleans, and I can remember times in New Orleans where if someone had said that, it would have felt more reasonable to me. I still would not have agreed with it, but like I would have been like, well, okay, that's understandable, right? I get why you're saying that. Things are bad right now, right? People are getting shot a lot, and like there is kind of a lot of like mayhem going on. But my neighborhood in the 7th Ward is not super dangerous by any stretch, and especially not anymore. But like certainly the first couple of years I lived there, it was pretty routine. Like every couple of days at least, you'd hear people shooting at each other or something like that, or you'd hear about a neighbor that got shot or mostly got shot. There was a lot of shootings going on for a couple of years. But when I walked into my house, I didn't feel like, okay, well, I need to run across the street, get in my car, and get the hell out of here, right? Or like I don't want to walk down to the corner store at night because I might get robbed, right? It was never like that, but it feels like everybody seems to feel like that's what's happening to them right now.
It's very bizarre because in New Orleans, in Portland, in DC, we're seeing really large declines in crime. And at least with DC, you can say, okay, it's still elevated to where it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or right before COVID. Portland's had a 50% drop in murder this year compared to last year.
Jeez.
So Portland had this horrific increase from 2020 through 2023, and is seeing now a very sharp decline in the last 2 years. And New Orleans is the same, where if you'd come in here in 2022 and we had the highest murder rate in the country for a city of our size, and had gone from 119 to 266 murders, and we were averaging over 2 shootings a day for the course of a year, having the worst number of murders since before Katrina, I don't know that I would agree that the National Guard is a solution. I think
Right.
there's arguments to be made there, but you're like, okay, this is a time where if we're going to do this, now is the time to have this discussion. And it's just, that time is 2 or 3 years ago in most places.
Yeah.
It's, it's totally absent from where we are today.
No, well, I don't believe in this one neat trick will fix your problem at all, and I think it's a scam when people do that. Is there anything that we do on my side of these things as a reporter that we shouldn't do in terms of how we talk about statistics that may help deal with this problem?
I guess what bugs me about media coverage typically, and whenever I get interviewed, it bugs me when basically you want to compare between cities. And so I want to know which city in Louisiana is the most dangerous. I want to know, how does New Orleans compare to, St. Louis and Detroit? And because of the way stats are kept, and because the border, St. Louis is a city of 2.5 million people, I think, the metro area. The city of St. Louis itself, because of the very restrictive way the borders are drawn, has 275,000 people in it. New Orleans, the metro area is 1.5 million. The city itself, or 1 million. The city itself is 370,000. So there's very different. Then you talk in New York, where basically the entire metro area is New York City.
Right.
So because these issues are there's not apples to apples when you're looking at various cities, media always wants to compare, and I say, compare New Orleans to itself. New Orleans has seen more murders now than it did, way more murders now than it did in 2019, here in 2022. Or now, New Orleans has seen way fewer murders than it did in 2022. But comparing between cities and really wanting to make it seem like it's a sporting event, or comparing the Saints to the Falcons, that just doesn't work for crime as well.
Okay. Speaking of Saints and Falcons, let's move on to
All right,
a
more
bunch-
depressing topics.
A more depressing topic, yeah. The New Orleans Saints. What is one good thing that's going on with them right now?
They won.
Okay, sure.
They're a third of the way to my preseason expectations. So that's good.
So you had them at 3 wins.
Yeah, 3 to 4, I think, was
Oof.
my best case. The one good thing, I guess I'll one up you and do 2. That one, they've got the 3 rookies that really seem like they got something good, and Banks, Sanker, and seems like Riley's pretty decent. They've gone there've been, I won't say decades, but it feels like decades where they haven't had 3 rookies that have really participated in a class. So that's a very positive. And Spencer Rattler has been mediocre, which is such a win. He was not. But you look and the Falcons used the top 10 pick on getting a quarterback who isn't yet mediocre. I mean, he's slightly below average, I would say, to this point. He may be better. But the Titans used a pick on a guy who's been the worst quarterback in the NFL so far this year. And he probably will improve, and he's got a lot of talent. But the Saints used a 5th-round pick and are getting really good value out of that right now. Guys improve. Maybe Spencer Rattler gets better, and he's above average. But also, you kind of, at this point, you're not winning a title with this team with a mediocre quarterback. But he's not a disaster either.
What do you think about the near term, next couple seasons? I mean, you live this moment to moment during the season, and I love it. If anybody does not follow Jeff on Twitter or on Blue Sky or whatever, definitely do, because it is amazing. It's like a very angsty zeitgeist of New Orleans. I know how the city's going to feel kind of by looking at what you put on a Monday morning on social media. I'm like, okay, well, we lost, but it doesn't seem like it's that bad. So the
Hear
city's
that,
not gonna be
honey? See,
terrible.
I'm contributing to the city by skeeting.
But when you're in it, then I'm like, oh crap, Monday's good. This is gonna be a bad Monday. I can tell already. Over do we have anything to look forward to over the next 2, 3, 5 years?
I mean, the joy of the NFL is you hire a good head coach, you get a good solution at quarterback, and you have a really good draft class, and you've suddenly turned around your entire franchise. The Saints did that in 2000 to a degree. They did it in 2006 to a degree. They did it again in 2017, where everything they didn't have the coach or the quarterback knew, but they had an amazing draft class. So it's very easy to turn around a franchise. The negative is that you've got the same decision makers that have basically put the team in this hole you've got at least through this year, through this off season, you've got basically no ability to spend money.
Right.
And so it's a very tall hill to climb. And you've got a GM who has been the most successful GM in franchise history. And the day he retires, he should be in the Saints Hall of Fame. But he also hasn't had any success since Sean Payton and Drew Brees left. So, are we going to change our team philosophy? And without continuing to innovate, without continuing to bring in new blood and new ideas, which we have not done in years, it's really hard to build and sustain a winner. So
Yes.
But firing the whole executive team and bringing in new coaches, those are no guarantees. You look at the Browns and the Texans and all of these franchises that aren't succeeding despite taking these steps. I think at this point, though, it's kind of a prerequisite to potentially succeeding.
Yes, I grew up a Washington fan. I grew up in the D.C. area. I lived there until I moved here. And so 2016 was my first year as a Saints fan. But I kind of stopped being a Washington fan because Dan Snyder is the devil and sucks and is a horrible human and worst owner, and ran that team into the ground. And so I spent 20 plus years watching him grind them to dirt from what had the era of John Riggins and Darryl Green and all that when they were an amazing juggernaut of a football team. And so I know what it kind of feels like to start off. And I'm more than happy to start off again. Like the first couple of seasons that I was a Saints fan were awesome, but now it's kind of sucking. But also, I'm kind of who cares? But it does seem like their management is kind of old now too, a little bit, right? They're not going to be around for.
No, they're not. And if they get the number one pick, they didn't try to get the number one pick. It's because of the team they picked. I mean, I definitely feel like there's this line of New Orleanians that either came here in the last 20 years or were born in the last 20 years, and I'm like Clooney in the Noose where he's like first time. This was our lives growing up. They didn't win a playoff game until I was almost 20, and
right.
They didn't approach reasonability. I mean, they were decent for many of the Mora years, but they were never really good. And we went through the Ditka years, went through the late stage Mora years, went through the Hazlitt years, other than 2000. This is the norm. I mean,
Yeah, and also people have a lot of opinions about Gail Benson, but one thing is that she's not super involved in the day-to-day operations of the New Orleans Saints, right? I mean,
no.
She's not telling people draft this person because they're on my fantasy team.
No, and I think to her credit, what we've seen in the last year is one, when things got really bad last year, 7-game losing streak, she intervened. Mm-hmm. And Mickey didn't want to fire Dennis Allen, but she knew what was coming, and I think that she may not be, just like you and I are not football experts. Right. We're not savants about this, but we can see when things are going bad. She has the purse strings and the ability to make changes, and I think they do recognize that there is a degree of when the public is right about certain things, and certainly with Dennis Allen, she knew that the public was right. The question is, with that 49ers game where there were 60-40 49ers fans, if we get something like that the entire season, is that going to be something that says, okay, I need more drastic changes because this is just not working? I don't know. She has proven that she won't just sit there and take the L's over and over and over again. And even with the Pelicans, I mean, she made changes.
Yeah.
They haven't always worked. They usually have not worked, but to her credit, she will make changes, and this is something we can hope that changes will make a better team.
Yeah, I feel like the Pelicans, they don't, the Saints feel that it's a bit they're stuck in their ways a little bit with what they're doing, whereas the Pels, it feels like they're at least trying to figure out how to make it work, and they're open to some changes over there. So I always feel much more hopeful about the Pelicans than I do about the Saints. But we're almost out of time, but I wanted to hit real quick. You have a new podcast. You mentioned it a little bit earlier. What's it called?
The Jeffalytics podcast.
The Jeffalytics.
Jeffalytics, yeah, that's the name of my.
Are you gonna get this as a tramp stamp?
No, what's going on? I'll make bumper stickers or something. I just launched. Michael Lewis was my first guest, and good New Orleans boy, and then Laura Arnold of Arnold Ventures will be on and talking about funding the future of criminal justice. I just interviewed Larry Krasner this week, so that'll be out soon. And it's not designed to be, it's designed to be a place to talk about how we can better evaluate these issues. And there's no right or wrong answer, but how can we communicate stories and do this when we're seeing clear trends? How do we talk about them in a way that's effective and efficient?
Yeah.
And then I have a newsletter, and I understand I'm going to be the first 45 under 45 with Gambit. we could talk about that offline.
Yes. Yeah, I'm doing that one, and then I'm going to launch next year 52 under 52. So, yeah. Well, look, you have long been one of my favorite people that I've met through social media. You are brilliant, and I really do think that, like, the work that you did when you were working with the city council was super important, because there was a couple of moments when you were still working with them where they seemed like there was a lot of pressure on them to do a lot of old school Reagan era, let's just go broken windows on the city and just rough up everybody. And I feel like you being able to explain to them why things were the way they were, and to take a breath when they were looking at data, stopped a lot of really bad things from happening in the city. And I really, really,
Well, I'll say, I'm very proud of that work, because especially with relates to NOPD response times and centering the council on, one, that these things were getting really bad, and that the result was that people were dying, victims were being victimized again by the system. And we've really seen, I know the city went from 180-minute average response time in April 2023 to now it's a 60-minute average response time. And that's not great, but it's
a hell of a lot better than 180 minutes.
Yeah, and so I'm very proud of that work.
Yeah, and I think every journalist who sees this should definitely subscribe to your newsletter and be watching the podcast, because I think it's clear now, I have a huge problem with how we handle data, and I think that you are one of the few data people that I look at and are not gonna, what I would call Nate Silver it, which is this is just the way it is, and if you just look at these numbers the way that I'm going to show them to you, everything will be fine if you do what I tell you to do, and you really take a human and a real lived world experience.
I appreciate that.
To looking at data, which I think is very important, and I think we could learn a lot from you.
We'll have to do it before and after if my head has grown in the last 30 minutes.
All right, man, well, thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
All right.
All good? All right, that was fun.
Oh yeah, you also do Stanton, right?
Too easy.
Thanks. Too easy, LOL. Oh, in honor of Derek, I just peeped.
Yeah. I grabbed it out of the